As a beginner woodworker, what you see on social media can be overwhelming. We are all building bigger, more expensive, and over-the-top projects than ever before. So we're gonna keep this one really simple with 3 projects you can knock out in less than a day, and they make perfect gifts. But most importantly, they're gonna make you a better woodworker. First up is one of my favorite projects and something that you could give to just about any person in the world. How is that possible, you might be asking? Well, because everyone poops. There's even a book about it. That's right, we are building a wood squatty potty, which greatly assists you or a loved one while going number 2. And nothing says I love you like the gift of a complete elimination. While yes, these are reasonably basic builds, there are loads of great tips throughout, so pay attention. But I'm starting by ripping 2 boards down to just over 5 inches that I'll then glue together. And 1 hour later, you've made a panel. I'm gonna scrape off this glue and then we can start cutting this to final size. Also, time to let you know there is a special bonus because I'm building not 1, but 2 of these to demonstrate different assembly methods. Whenever you're making panels like this, glue it together oversized so you don't need to worry about getting the ends to line up perfectly. It's much easier to trim it later on and then everything will be perfectly square. Option 1 is a simple butt joint, no pun intended. However, we're going to add some extra pizzazz to spice it up later. And to cut the leg pieces, I'm clamping a stop block at 6.5 inches, ensuring these legs will be identical. So remember, remove measuring whenever possible. And the top piece was trimmed down to 19 inches. Okay, for option 2, if you're feeling adventurous, we are going to cut some miters into the side here to create a waterfall effect. This might look complicated, but I promise you it's really easy. And then you can duplicate this on bigger pieces of furniture later on, so it's really good to get a nice practice run on a pot that you squat. No, squatty potty, that's right. A stool that you keep your feet on while you're pooping. How's that? Just like option 1, I'm measuring in 6.5 inches to establish my leg cuts and using my handy combo square to strike a 45-degree line that I can use to line up the cut on my table saw. Then it's as simple as running these boards through, holding everything nice and steady to establish your top and side pieces. Want to see something funny? Watch me jump like I saw a ghost in 3, 2, there it is. So if you're unfamiliar with what just happened, I have a saw stop and these trigger themselves if they hit your flesh. They'll also trigger themselves if they hit things like metal or aluminum. I forgot to tighten the fence on this and it moved and it actually nicked, well, there it is, that tiny little detail right there. That's what triggered it. So now you can see it is jammed in there. And yeah, I've been meaning to replace that blade anyway, so we'll say that I meant to do that. Oh, there you go. Saw stop haters are gonna eat this one up. Had the saw for 3 years though, and that's the first time that's happened. Not the best news of the week, but not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. Here's the big trick whenever you're doing a waterfall miter. After you make that first cut, you might be thinking, oh, this is so simple. I just attach these in and then I'm good to go. But that doesn't allow the grain to wrap around. You can see that this was our first cut. So what we have to do is actually flip this board around and then make a 45-degree cut going the opposite direction. It'll all make sense in a second. Now that we have all the parts cut to size, I'm going to cut out an oval on the top parts so these can tuck underneath your commode when not in use. Recently, I published a video about buying knockoff tools from overseas websites, and I'm not going to say it was my best work, but I do think the overarching message of supporting local businesses when you can is important. So I'm going to do my best going forward to highlight those items when it makes sense. You're going to be seeing a lot of the PEC combo square with this build because it's a combo type of project. These are amazing quality at what I consider a really reasonable price, and like I said, made locally. And I'm not one to get overhyped on the looks of tools, but their black and gold scheme is pretty cool in my book. I'll leave a link below if you're looking to gift yourself something. So you saw me using a 5-gallon bucket to trace the pattern, and then to save time, I'm actually taping the 2 tops together, and I can cut those out with a jigsaw at the same time. Now, whenever you're making a tight curve, make some relief cuts before you start. It's really important, but it's actually not as important as avoiding cutting into your workbench.
Idiot.
You can use any type of wood you want for this build, but if you're going to be making multiples like I am, I would encourage you to stay away from really dense species like oak. In fact, just stay away from oak altogether. Instead, check out cherry, walnut, alder, poplar, pine from the big box store, essentially anything that shapes reasonably easy. Why? Because these cuts aren't going to be dead on. And if I can be your woodworking voice of reason for a moment, no one will care besides you that it isn't perfectly round and smooth. Everyone else is just impressed you actually made something, and that's how it should be. I'm going to pre-sand before assembly, but here's a little woodworking hack. Old yoga mats, or I guess new yoga mats if you have never got your down dog on, make a great no-slip surface for holding pieces while sanding. And they're designed to conveniently roll away. I think you can pick them up for like 10 bucks or so, and it's one of the most used items in my shop. What I absolutely love about this project, other than the obvious poop jokes, I mean, it's a stool for your stool, is the fact that you can really dress this up and try some new skills that, again, you can apply to other builds. So I'm going to show you how to assemble these, and we'll add some cool accents, but we'll start with gluing together the waterfall using nothing but tape. You're looking at my patent-pending pizza flip method after I tape these pieces together. And look, you might be getting sick of me saying this, but I really want to re-emphasize what I said throughout. As a beginner, all of this can feel intimidating, especially when you see these polished videos online. But we all start somewhere. I sucked when I first got into woodworking. In fact, I still suck, just slightly less. I'm always fighting comparing my skills to someone else, and it's a bad mindset to be in. Best course of action is get out there, start gluing boards together, and then look at your fancy mitered stool. Okay, while that one finishes drying, we're going to focus on stool number 2. This butt joint will be secured with a combo of glue and screws. Complete overkill, but hey, that's what we do. You want these screws to land right in the middle of your leg pieces. So using a combo square, set your depth to half the leg thickness and mark accordingly. I want said screws to be recessed into the top of the stool, and now most beginners start with a basic drill bit set here, but I would highly encourage you to look at a Forstner bit when drilling non-through holes that need to be clean. This is a 1/2-inch bit, and I find myself reaching for it quite often. And here's another little hack. When drilling into the end grain of a dense wood like oak, it likes to crack or even break the screws. In addition to pre-drilling, you can lubricate your screw heads with paste wax to prevent that from happening. What I love about this construction method is all of your friends are going to think you're a master woodworker, and it is so simple. So we're going to cover up these holes with some face grain plugs. Now, you do have the option to use dowels if you would like. The problem with dowels instead of face grain plugs is that the dowels show the end grain and the face grain plugs are face grain. So I think it looks a little bit neater. I do buy these in bulk. It's 20 bucks for that bag because I use these so often. And they do sell plug cutters if you want to make your own, but who's got time for that? Back to stool number 1, which has had plenty of time to dry now and is looking great. You have this neat effect where the grain comes from the top and wraps down the sides. People are going to be so impressed with your woodworking skills. Now you might be thinking, do I need to reinforce this with screws? And the answer back is absolutely not. But if you're looking to add a little extra flair and overkill in the form of reinforcement, I'm going to show you a dead simple way without even needing a jig to add some splines. Just inside the edge of your mitered joint, strike a 45-degree line that is going to be used as a guide for setting up the cut. And the idea here is to play with the blade height so your entry point and exit point of the teeth is right on said line. Now, you're not going to be pushing this all the way through the saw, so set a stop block along your fence to make a repeatable and accurate cut. Then it's as simple as aligning your blade with the desired locations of your spline and going to town. Again, another technique that might seem intimidating, but it is so simple. And I like that you don't need to spend an hour building a special jig. The wood that will fill those kerfs, also known as the splines, can be made using your table saw, and always cut them slightly snug and then sand each one to fit. Making wood smaller is a lot easier than making it bigger. Also, another reminder, this is overkill and not necessary. The miter on its own can be a finished product. But speaking of finished product, I'm applying a hard wax oil to these bad boys, and look how it brings these to life and really highlights the contrasting woods. It's a simple project that will make you look like a pro. And sometimes we all need to remind those that we truly care about that no matter what, we love the shit out of them. Okay, I've had enough fun with this one. On to the next. If our first build was considered all function, our second project goes heavy into form by making a really awesome looking end grain sign. This is some old reclaimed wood from a local mill I've had sitting in my shed for about 4 years. And it's a mix of old heart pine, I think fir, maybe even an exotic 2x4, I don't know. But I'm starting by cutting these 3 boards to thicknesses and widths that share a common denominator. I'm going to explain this in more detail shortly. What I really love about this project and the next steps is essentially there are no rules. And you hear all the time from beginners, well, I can't get 2 cuts to be the exact same size. Great news, that doesn't matter. Now I'm going to be using the crosscut sled. You can do the exact same thing on your miter saw. But for this video, Han Solo to save the day. Let me explain the sizing of these pieces more clearly. The idea is all the end grain cutoffs will fit together like a puzzle of sorts. Now, my supposedly smart math friends assured me that to avoid gaps, the length and width of each end grain piece needs to share a common denominator. I then said, I clearly understand what a denominator is, but to be safe, you should explain it to me so I can be sure you understand it. And essentially, the length and width of my boards needs to be evenly divisible by the same number. On my project, the dimensions can all be evenly divided by 1/4 inch. You can pick whatever you want to be your denominator. Mine was based purely on what I had to work with and trying to make it as simple as I could for my friends who were clearly struggling with this basic math. As far as the height of these end grain pieces, I do have a stop block set for my max height, but everything else can truly be random, which makes this pattern really come to life. Okay, we need a piece of wood to affix all of our little offcuts to. And this is a piece of 1/2 inch plywood that I had laying around. I know everyone always says, oh, how do you conveniently have 1/2 inch plywood laying around? Well, we are currently remodeling our kitchen and I've been remaking a bunch of drawers. So there you go. And this actually seemed like a decent enough size. I didn't have to cut it at all. This particular piece is right around 24.5 by 14. I think it's a good number of inches for this project. I'm striking vertical and horizontal center lines to act as a starting guide. And the trick is to work from the middle out for a couple different reasons. Number one, if you're going to be affixing numbers or letters to this, you want those reasonably centered. And reason number two, those numbers or letters needs to be resting on pieces that are the same size so they will lay flattish. Getting these laid out and the spacing correct is really the most time-consuming part of this process, because after that, it's purely dealer's choice on what you think looks best. I'm using a combo of wood glue and super glue with an accelerator, and that acts like a clamp and holds the blocks in place while the actual wood glue dries. Then you can turn on some music and enter your Zen mode and enjoy the moment. And while we're on the general topic of gift giving, you might be looking for a hint to leave for your friends or family. And I would consider taking a look at the full lineup from Jackery. A couple of videos back, I gifted my neighbor John the SG2000 Plus, and he's been happily using it for camping trips ever since. Now that model has a crazy capacity of 2,000 watt hours of power and features a nice mix of DC and AC outlets, so you can power anything from an iPhone to a refrigerator. And the best thing is you can stack up to 5 of these battery packs, and each one adds an additional 2,000 watt hours. You can even add the optional solar panels to charge this on the go. Now I use the 1000 Pro all the time around my yard when I don't feel like running extension cords. We also take this thing tailgating with our friends. Point being, there is something for everyone. And Jackery is actually running a 50% off sale through November 27th. While you're at it, make sure you subscribe to their Black Friday live stream. It's on their official store. That's happening on the 27th, and you'll have a shot at winning $50,000 in giveaways. And a special thanks as always to Jackery for sponsoring this video. All right, that was surprisingly fun. A bit like a weird wooden game of Tetris. Now this next step is a great lesson in the importance of waiting to the last possible moment to cut your pieces to final size. I'm taking equal cuts off the sides and top and bottom to keep everything centered. It's probably starting to make sense why I didn't go all the way to the edge of my plywood with the end grain pieces. This is much easier than trying to get all those little blocks to line up perfectly straight. I guess that it is possible, but it would take a lot of planning and math. Now, I could clearly handle the calculations. However, for my two friends who barely knew what a denominator was, they might struggle. I don't love that I left this tall smidgen of a piece here, so I'm going to trim a little bit off each side to get rid of that. It's the beauty of a basic project like this. There are no rules. You get to do whatever you want. De-smidgened. It's a technical term, by the way. This is looking better, but to kick it up a notch, we're going to build a simple frame to hide the edges. And I felt like the top of the frame should be just barely lower than the numbers, so I marked that spot and cut some red oak to size. After setting the miter saw to 45 degrees, I'm going to establish the first cut, and rather than measure and then mark, I'm going to use a referential measurement in place and then cut the opposing miter using that line as a guide. If you were to measure that marking, you're adding in another variable, and generally that's where things go wrong. Well, I was about to tell you guys it's important to sneak up on this cut and slowly get there, but as fate would have it, I accidentally nailed it the first time. So do as I say, not as I do. Sneak up on that one. Don't do that. That could have been bad. Happy accident, though. For the other three frame pieces, it's a simple rinse and repeat procedure. And no, you absolutely don't need to clamp your wood to the miter saw like this. The alternative for me is you get a bunch of close-up camera footage showing my gangly, hairy arms and not any actual cutting. Now, you might be the person that likes the look of red oak, and it's likely that you're wearing white New Balance shoes and a t-shirt tucked into your jeans right now. But I am not that person. Well, yet at least. Give me another 7 years and I'll be there. So I'm going to be dyeing the frame black using India ink, which should create a nice contrast with the end grain pieces. There is likely another contingent of viewers yelling at their screens that what I'm building will inevitably crack and explode because it doesn't allow for proper wood movement. Now, that is possible, but highly unlikely with such small pieces. And remember, this is a simple one-day beginner project, not an eventual submission to the Louvre. If you still feel that way, go build something else. I'll be using the same CA glue trick to hold everything nice and snug while the actual wood glue dries, and a couple clamps will help distribute nice even pressure for the 60 seconds or so it takes for the super glue to harden. You could also use a pin or brad nailer, but then you'd have to deal with covering up those holes. This is simply easier and cleaner looking in my opinion. Also, congratulations, if this is your first time cutting miters, you're officially qualified to build picture frames. Well done. The numbers that I purchased for this sign do come with screws, but drilling and screwing through end grain, especially close to edges, seems like a recipe for disaster. So instead, I'm just going to use some 5-minute epoxy. I'm using this as a gift for someone and it's their house numbers, but I was thinking you could have a lot of fun with this. City abbreviations, airport codes, area codes, important dates, the list goes on and on and on, so get creative. I also imagine this could be a really great seller for those of you that like to get your Etsy on. I would just make sure that you're pricing it correctly because there is a decent amount of labor. For the finish, I'm using a can of my favorite spray lacquer, and phew, look at it all come to life. I did have my doubts how this would turn out, but I am really liking the final product. Overall, a fun and cool looking build that you need to try. For my next trick, I'm sliding Darth Blader out of the way because we are diving into the scrap bin. I have a general idea of what I want to make, but it's going to be dependent on what's hidden in this hoarder's paradise. Okay, I've got this sorted into different groups here. We have the tall skinny boards, we have shorter boards of all different sizes and thicknesses, we have pieces that I shot dominoes into the wrong side of, firewood, and trash. Like my Gumby body, the long skinny pieces need to be beefed up. So I'm going to first rip the strips down to the same thicknesses of 3/4 of an inch, and then I can glue them all together, and this will remove a lot of sanding later in the process. Additionally, since the boards were a hodgepodge of different lengths, I'm going back to our old friend Han to cut these all to around 10 inches. And I have no idea if that's the right number of inches. I am truly making this one up as I go. Okay, I've been playing around with the layout of this, and you might be wondering what it is we're making at this point. Is it a cutting board? Because it sure looks like a cutting board. Here's a fun fact. I've never made a cutting board my entire time I've been woodworking. I have cut rectangles to cutting board sizes. I've just never put food on them. Feels like a Mitch Hedberg joke. I've never made a cutting board, but I have cut a bunch of rectangles you could put delicious food on. Something like that. So we've seen an all function and an all form project, and I'm hoping this piece is a blend of both, which is why I'm using a straight edge to line up these bottom 4 posts. And you're likely really confused as to what this thing even is. Now, I was inspired by that randomness of the end grain sign, which is why these strips are all staggered. A creative designer I am definitely not, so it's possible this ends up looking horrible, but you do need to get out there and try new things as often as you can. The trick is keeping the glue squeeze out minimized, so I spent a little extra time marking where to stop the glue on each board, which is way better than the alternative of cleaning it later. Alright, it's been an hour, let's get this thing out of the clamps. Whatever this is. I thought the overall look would be better if only one side was staggered and the other straight. A juxtaposition of sorts. I don't even know if that's the right use of juxtaposition. Nonetheless, I'm thinking that was the right call, but we'll see in a bit. Okay, I have a confession to make. Aside from the obvious scrap hoarder problem I have going on, I'm a waffler, and I can't decide what I want to do for the shelf for this piece. So in the meantime, while that waffle cooks, I'm going to tackle these pieces here that are the definition of form meets function. Thankfully, I found my last remaining shop pencil, and I'm marking the centers for these posts and drilling out a recess with a Forstner bit. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this was a little nerve-wracking since I have about a 64th of an inch to play with in some cases before I blew through the sides. But a sure hands John got it done, and it's a really nice fit for these rare earth magnets. You might think you're the only person that stands in your shop just staring at a project, hoping it will tell you what the right answer is, but of course it never does because this is a piece of wood. It's got to the point where I've essentially turned into a waffle myself. I'm just going to cut this and we'll see what happens. You might be wondering what I was going full waffle mode on earlier, and it was 2 things. Number 1 was the actual size of this contraption, and number 2 was how I was going to attach an upper shelf. Now I went back and forth, but I felt like a rabbit was the best course of action, and the bonus is it's another type of joinery that you at home can practice on something basic like this. So I marked my locations on where to start the rabbit, and I set my blade to half the thickness of the material. Now it doesn't need to be an exact science here, just gotta get it reasonably close. Now cutting rabbits looks scary, but it's truly as simple as running your board through the table saw a bunch of times and then bumping the fence over in between each pass until there is nothing left but a nice, clean rabbit. I have an interesting idea. Now, let me also say, generally when I have an idea like this, things go wrong, but I'm gonna try and remain optimistic. So the shelf fits in here nice, but this front part needs a lip for about half of it. So my thought was, rather than just glue another piece of walnut on, I have this offcut from the top side that broke off because there wasn't glue on one side of it. What if I put this up top and then the pattern just continues up? The problem is it wouldn't be flush with the rest of the shelf and would look silly, which means I need to notch out a portion of this piece of walnut to make it all look nice. I do realize that using a bandsaw is now exiting the realm of standard beginner tools, but you can do this with a jigsaw, or you can not do it at all and just put a lip across the entire front of your shelf and call it a day. The point in me doing this is more to remind you, do your best to try something new in every project like I myself am doing right now. And that's how you start to really progress and learn new techniques. All right, folks. So far, so good. I'm gonna do this glue up in 2 sections, just a much safer way to do it than trying to manage it all at first. So I feel like if I get the shelf lip on first, I'll use some CA glue to make it go faster. Then I can put that onto the back with this. While that dries, I'm going to use the same 5-minute epoxy from earlier in the video to attach these rare earth magnets to my form meets function posts. At this point in the build, I still have no clue if I actually like the design or not, but I'm sure you all will happily let me know in the comment section how you feel. The top shelf would be totally fine with just glue on its own, but these screws add a nice safety net and double as clamps to hold it all snug and secure. I was in a lacquer state of mind, and it was also a beautiful day, so outside we go to get this finished up. But there you have it, a simple entry shelf with magnetic key holders. If you want to see more of these one-day beginner builds, let me know down below. We'll see ya.